Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Center for Threat-Informed Defense's four-part series on threat modeling, where we dive into the threat modeling process by answering four key questions. I'm Tiffany Bergeron with the Center for Threat-Informed Defense, and joining us on this series is Adam Shostak, a leading expert on threat modeling who has written some of the most popular books on the subject and one of the creators of the four questions we'll discuss today. Welcome, Adam.
Great to be here with you.
Thank you. So I thought we would start by talking about threat modeling itself, and what that means and how organizations use it in general, and then we can dive into more specifics on it. So Adam, would you like to share what threat modeling means to you?
Sure. So let me start from the reason we do it. And I've come to think of threat modeling as the measure twice, cut once of cybersecurity. The idea is we think about what we're going to do before we do it so we can do it more effectively, right? There's never time to do it right. There's always time to do it over. Or, if we're building things out of physical material, right, we measure wood twice before we cut it, because otherwise you've got a piece of wood that's too short, and that's a waste. So whenever whatever it is we're working on in technology, we can think about how are we going to anticipate the problems? How are we going to plan? And there's another quote that I find really resonates with people. This is from Frank Lloyd Wright, the architect. And he would say, you can fix it on the drawing board with an eraser, or you can fix it on the job site with a sledgehammer.
Hmm.
And I find those two things to contextualize. And so let me answer the question really specifically. What is threat modeling? Threat modeling is using models, abstractions, to think about threats. And I think about threats as things that can go wrong,
Hmm.
right? So today, you've got a threat of skidding with the snow there in Florida.
Correct.
Um, I just like saying snow in
Yeah,
Florida. What can I say?
it's a crazy concept, isn't it?
It
But here
is.
it is.
Um, and if we're building a technological system, and we'll get into this, I'm sure, we can talk about threats like exploitation,
Mhm.
persistence, lateral movement as things that attackers can do.
Mhm.
And if we abstract the system to help us see the forest, and we're using models to think about the threats, that right there is the essence of threat modeling. And you and I have collaborated over a long time. We won't even get into that. But as security experts, we've learned how to do this work in an apprenticeship model from the
Mhm.
folks around us. And as we go from hanging out with other security experts to hanging out with a broader set of engineers, we need ways to help organizations make this part of their practice.
Absolutely.
And that to me is the context for what threat modeling is, why we do it, and I'm sure
Mhm.
we're going to talk a lot about how.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll certainly get into that. And then, what you're saying there about, the apprenticeship approach to threat modeling, I think that's why it's so important that we are now trying to document the approaches and really build them out. Because, we're all trying to look across our systems, across our organizations, and identify those threats and how we can help mitigate them. So we're all doing this, but wouldn't it be great if we all followed a process, we all had a process we could share and follow and improve together. And that's why we keep talking about threat modeling, keep following these approaches and building them out. And that's why the center um, took on this threat modeling with ATTACK project, which you can learn more about at ctid.miter.org. But that's also why we're collaborating with you, Adam, as an expert in this area, because we want to bring it all together. We want to collaborate and combine our expertise to ensure that we're bringing the community these resources.
Yes, and I assume it'll be on screen, but CTID is Center for Threat Informed Defense, so CTID.
Thank
Dot
you.
miter.
Yes.
Yeah. And yeah, no, it's a funny story about the consistency thing. I was delivering training last week, and there was someone there who had learned how to do a very risk-centric approach to threat modeling. And so rather than discussing threats, he spent the week discussing risks.
Mm-hmm.
And he kept bringing likelihood into everything. And that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
It's not what I teach. And getting into this self-awareness of, hey, you do this way, I do this way, so that we can have a conversation about, in this situation, I want to do this, is really so incredibly powerful. It helps us collaborate. It helps us get to better results. And do you mind if I share the origin story for this conversation?
Not at all. I would love for you to share that.
Yeah. So you all published a long white paper on threat modeling with ATTACK.
Mm-hmm.
And I picked it up, and when I train, I train with two primary methods, one of which is stride, the other is ATTACK. And we had really different views on how to threat model with ATTACK, which is great because as experts, we've been having some really good conversations, not just with you, but also with some of your colleagues.
Absolutely, yep.
And I think I know I've learned stuff. I feel you've learned stuff, and I feel we've all matured as we've been able to talk about, oh, we're doing it like this for these customers in these ways for this reason. And I appreciate the kind things you've said about my books, but really we're all learning and we're all figuring out how to make this work better. And that's why I'm excited to be here with you talking about threat modeling with ATTACK.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, it's true. We are all learning and we are all trying to improve and keep up with the ever-changing attack surfaces, the ever-changing adversary environment. So yes, it's a constant evolution, that is for sure. Let's see. So we talked about what is threat modeling. I wonder if we should talk about the why a little bit.
Sure.
All right. So when we perform threat modeling, we're looking at what could go wrong with a system, right? And how we can mitigate many of those aspects. Would you like to get a little deeper into why we should do this and how it contributes to system design, development, as well as existing systems?
Yeah. So actually, since we just threw in two of the four questions, right? What can go wrong? No, it's great. Let me throw in the other two. So what are we working on? What can go wrong? What are we going to do? And did we do a good job? And when we get into the question of what are we working on, we might be working on, a spaceship. We might be working on an app for delivering food across town. We might be working on a critical infrastructure project that's going to come under attack by nation state level adversaries who are going to be determined to get in. And with each of these, wherever you are in the supply chain, you can be thinking about what can go wrong and what am I going to do about it. So, I spent some time at Microsoft,
Mm-hmm.
and at Microsoft we back then we build operating systems, right? And so there's a lot of flexibility as to what those operating systems might do and how they might do it, and trade-offs that you make about usability versus security, trade-offs you make about manageability. All sorts of things go into deciding what the product is going to look like. And ideally, we take security into account. Um, and then we ship it, and every organization in the world picks it up and says, okay, now I'm going to build a system using this as a component. How do I do that in a safe way? How do I make sure my system as a whole responds to these problems? And the organizing questions that we use don't change. The ways we answer them changes.
Mm-hmm.
Our flexibility in how we answer them changes. For example, Microsoft is also not at the very origin of a supply chain. Microsoft works with a lot of partners like Intel to develop things. And so they have a different level of control than, say, Apple does. And so their answers and Apple's answers are different. And all of these different answers result in slightly different ways of thinking about the question of what can go wrong, what, slightly different, it's not slightly different, but very different answers as to what am I going to do about it. And so threat modeling at its best helps us organize that conversation within our organization, maybe even helps us organize that conversation across organizations. When somebody comes to Microsoft and says, can you please turn off NTLM, please?
Yeah, and again, therein lies collaboration.
Yes, indeed.
Right. And I think that really shows that threat modeling doesn't apply to just a certain type of system. It really is broad spectrum for all types of systems, as well as all types of organizations, and anyone that's concerned about the security of their systems, security of their data, really needs to be doing some form of threat modeling.
I agree. Can I jump in here for just a
Yeah,
second?
definitely.
So some organizations are, let's say a bank, very focused on compliance.
Yes.
And look, they've got a lot of regs that they've got to comply with. I find that starting with the why, starting with what are the threats, leads you to the set of controls that matter to you and helps make your apps more secure in the way you want them to be secure. And that usually leads to compliance as well, because you'll usually find the right set of things.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll find, hey, for this threat, we can take this approach. Or you might find, for this situation, there's no regulation that requires we do A, B, or C.
Mm-hmm.
But common sense might, not common sense, let me take back that common sense. It's never common sense. It makes it harder for other people to do the work when they're like, well, that doesn't seem like common sense to me. But I remember years and years ago, I was doing some work for a bank, and somebody came up with the bright idea of letting people buy mutual funds with their credit cards.
Oh.
Which I thought was pretty cool, right? Help people save, they can get some points on them, but also carries a risk that the bank will not get paid for this mutual fund.
Right.
That seems like a bad thing if you're a bank. But it
Yeah.
turns out that this bank was large enough and did enough business in mutual funds that if they happened to hold a few tens of millions of dollars in unpaid for mutual funds on any given day, they felt it would average out in the wash.
Okay.
So they had actually gone through, considered the risk,
Mhm.
and said some days the market goes up and those mutual funds that we take out of Adam's account will be profitable for us. And other days the market goes down and we'd like to help people invest. So we're going to let them do this.
Hmm. It's interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. It's an interesting model for sure.
Uh, but having thought through
Mm-hmm.
very implicitly at the time what can go wrong, turns out they already had a good answer to what are we going to do about it, which is we'll just put it on the profit and loss side of the business.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it didn't go forward for other reasons, but that sort of thing, and being able to say we're going to apply this methodology to it
Mm-hmm.
so that we can be consistent is great. One other thing about the 4-question framework that I think is really important and we
Okay.
sometimes skip over is sometimes just asking the 4 questions is really valuable.
Mm-hmm.
Giving people a chance to answer. Everybody has an answer to the question of what can go wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Like everybody. You just have to give them a chance.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes the answers are meh. Sometimes the answers are really revelatory and you only get because you're giving people permission to express what they think. You're valuing those diverse opinions that are going to come in that situation.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I've had all sorts of people. I've had senior executives identify technical risks that other people were missing. I've I've had like department admin people who were not high skilled identify really interesting things based on their personal experience with scams.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, that makes sense. Just opening that question up to a wider audience and taking all that feedback in, getting that diversity of opinion, diversity of thought, diversity of experience, using all of that to build to understand your threats and build those defenses. I think that's highly important.
exactly.
Um, all right. Well, thank you for that. And I feel we've covered pretty broadly threat modeling and in general everything around it. And we're talking about these 4 questions. How about we now start to go through those sort of in order? Those
Mhm.
questions being, what are we working on? What could go wrong? What are we going to do about it? And did we do a good job? So that's the core of our approach, are those 4 questions, which of course, Adam, over the years you've helped develop. That's the approach that the center followed, and looking at the threat modeling with attack project and paper that we put out. So let's talk about those in a little more detail, starting, of course, with the first question. So question 1, diving into that, what are we working on? So question 1 gets to the heart of what do we want to look at for threat modeling? Would you please discuss that in a little more detail?
Sure, sure. Um, the very first thing I'm going to say is the question, what are we working on? Not what are we building, but what are we working on is designed to focus us in on the thing that we're working on, which sounds obvious. Why is he even saying this? And the reason I'm saying this is sometimes people will come up with a version of this question, what are we building? And when we say what are we building, we lose some focus on the next thing we need to deliver. when we stay focused on what we're working on, we can influence the security decisions that we need to influence right now. We can influence the design decisions that we should influence right now. And so as an example, if what we're working on is building a new marketing website in, say, Salesforce, okay, we've got a whole set of technology decisions that we don't have to make, right? Versus, let's say, what we're working on is picking a different example where the tech stack is going to be more open. Let's say what we're working on is a self-driving car.
Okay.
So self-driving cars have stacks of server class computers in the back these days.
Mm-hmm.
So we have to pick what operating system they're going to run. We have to pick a whole set of things about the development environment that we're not working on when we're working on Salesforce, right? Those platforms, the platform has made some determinations for us.
Mm-hmm.
And if we want to get into, we're going to pen test Salesforce and find vulns in, I don't know, their SSL configuration, it's a bad use of our energy as security architects, right? That's stuff we can do later. We can make sure that we've configured things the way we want them configured, if Salesforce even gives us choices. But as we're making those choices, or as we're getting focused on what we're working on, we're making choices. Okay, so we're going to configure these computers in the car in this way, or we're going to separate test and prod in Salesforce, or we're going to make sure that we've got a set of admin accounts, and we're going to make sure that as a design choice, every admin account is going to use multi-factor authentication. Right? Those are choices that we make as we work on things. And can't tell you how many projects I've seen go wrong because they say, oh, well, the system as a whole looks like this, and I'm really concerned about attacks on Active Directory. Okay, legit, right? Active Directory gets attacked a lot. I'm gonna bet that for most of the projects you and I have worked on, switch off of Active Directory was not a choice.
That's a very good point.
And so if we're not working on that, if that's an environmental thing that we're taking dependency on, we're not going to change it. Let's focus our energy going back to the question, what are we working on?
Yeah, absolutely. So what are we working on is really about gathering information, right? Gathering information on the system, what the system is doing, the criticality of the system or the functions that it provides. And, as you're saying, are we using something that we have some control over the design or not? And that's something to consider as well.
Yeah, and just to build on that, it's not only gathering the information. I like to construct models, and I'm a big fan of drawing pictures.
Great point. Yeah.
One of the things that is sort of emblematic of threat modeling is people standing at a whiteboard arguing. Because as we are figuring, and there's a thing that's happening there, which is we are building a shared understanding of what we're working on together at the whiteboard. We're having this we're having this conversation, and the ability to point to things and say, I think this is really crucial.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I'll tell a little bit of a story here I don't usually tell, which is I learned this from your colleague Dave Mann. Back in the CVE days, when Dave and I were collaborating, I miss working with Dave.
Yeah, me too.
But back in the CVE days, we built CVE and it was successful. And Dave spent a lot of time saying, "What is this thing we've built and why does it work?" And he talked a lot about this idea of a boundary object that people could point to and say, this thing here is this. And CVEs became a boundary object between operational teams and security teams. I
Mm-hmm.
need you to patch 1999-1234. We both interpret what that thing is differently, but we have
Mm-hmm.
that thing to point to. And the whiteboard diagram is a boundary object that we construct together
Mm-hmm.
to say, here's what we're working on. And then sometimes, depending on why we're doing it, who's going to look at it later, we take that whiteboard diagram and we turn it into something fancier.
Mm-hmm.
And that work to make it fancier
Yeah.
has different
Yeah.
value than the work to get to that initial conversation.
Yes, definitely. And I'm really glad you brought that up, and I'm glad you shared that example from CVE, um, because yes, having that common language or that common diagram to have that conversation starter is so important. And like you're saying, start with this top level diagram where everybody can come together, and then flesh out the details for what is critical, the critical components, where's the data moving, um, what are we looking at, what are we working on. Um, and I'd just like to talk a little bit more about bringing different groups together.
Mm-hmm.
So much like CVE, it seems that threat modeling can be a way to overcome some of those challenges. Bringing together the executive level individuals with the technical level staff, whether that be IT, bringing in your cybersecurity experts. And I think we can look at threat modeling as a way to overcome that barrier to language and bring that common understanding to everyone about what we're talking about and why it's important.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've been surprised by is how important it can be to name rituals and name activity. Let's get together and talk about what we're going to do in the next sprint, for example.
Hmm.
Doesn't seem like an important meeting. But when you put a label of backlog grooming on it, suddenly it becomes a thing that we can talk about and say, okay, what makes for good backlog grooming?
Hmm.
How do we make sure it's efficient? Did it happen? Are we ready for the next sprint? Threat modeling is sometimes the only place that a team gets together to talk about the system design all up.
Yeah.
Because architecture, for good or for evil, has gotten a bad rap, right? There's too many system architects who were perceived as not doing useful work. Um, okay, so in that case, when do people get together? What are the times when we can have a conversation about design, about what the big components are, how they work,
Hmm.
and that work used to happen more um, over coffee at the water cooler.
Yeah.
And in today's world, where teams are much more distributed, where you might, yeah, there's a person I've been working with now for 5 years. We have never met face to face. We talk pretty much every single day.
Oh, that is much more common.
It's way more common. And so
Mhm.
when do we have it? And so threat modeling, excuse me, threat modeling can be that opportunity to talk about the all up construction of a system. And if we
Mhm.
don't have another place for it, bringing together both a broad group and a diverse group to say, here's what's going to happen. Here's the perspective of, um, reliability wants this to happen. Privacy wants this to happen. Um, Somebody says this thing is just not usable on a mobile device. Um, we need to spend time architecting for mobile because some people use their mobile devices for everything, and some people are much more, keyboard and mouse oriented.
Mhm.
Whatever it is, that conversation's so valuable.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Adam. I think that covers question one
I think
of
so.
the threat modeling process pretty thoroughly. Um, so to our viewers, please be sure to check back for the next installment where we'll discuss question two, what could go wrong? And Adam, in closing, would you like to share with us what you have coming up in the future?
So I think the thing that I want to share at the end of this episode is I want to mention that I've got a white paper on the 4 question framework.
Yeah, that would be a good
Um,
one. Yeah.
and so if you go to showstack.org/white papers, it's a free download. We do ask you to fill out a little form, but we threat modeled that form and we know that you can lie to us. So please don't waste our time or yours. You can just click download, or if you want to hear from me, please feel free to fill it out.
I encourage everyone to fill it out because you can get some valuable information.
That's right. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Adam. We'll see you soon for question two.